I'd love for you to get an intuitive sense of this free will in its original or absolute nature. Because if you have the ability to know, inherently within that is an ability to choose, to direct, or you could say to focus. At every moment of your life, you are literally free will creating an experience. You can realize right now. You deserve it, it's your right because you are it. Nothing can stop you. There is no spiritual law or rule that says you cannot go straight to source. And a simple inquiry that can get you to a deeper experiential realization of this is the inquiry. So a few of you requested for me to elucidate on what I mean by free will. It's quite a rich topic. And I'll start with a more technical exposition. And then we'll go into some more of the practicalities of it. How does it function? What does it mean on a day-to-day basis? What does it mean for you as a spiritual adept, as a potential teacher, and so on? So I'll be doing a little bit of reading, not as much as I did the other day with holistic manifestation. But I did prepare some notes, some writing, some quotes. All right, Discourse on Free Will. And these are just my notes, essentially, and a brief summary. But we'll send you this, or we'll attach this to the Bentinho Live Library along with this session when we post it in Massaro University. I've divided this topic into two primary topics. One is absolute free will, aka its nature, the nature of free will. And the other main topic is relative free will, aka its functioning. But let us begin with the, in my opinion, heart-opening and mind-expanding, but still a little bit more technical aspect of this. So, Chapter 1, Absolute Free Will, Its Nature. You can also see this as infinity's first emanation, or as in the Law of One, as they refer to it as the primary distortion, the first distortion of infinity, of the one original reality. So distortion simply means anything that is twisted, if you will, or formed in a certain way from its original state, condition, or substance. So in that sense, distortion implies non-separation. Let's say you have a rubber band, or you have a piece of clay, or you're working with a statue or pottery or something like that. Then as you're molding that clay, you're distorting the clay, but you're doing that with the clay. It's still made of clay. It's not something else. But you can also use the term appearance or emanation, if you will, as long as you keep in mind that none of this is originally separate or ever separate from the original base reality. So although we have a negative connotation in our society, usually applied to the word distortion, and of course, a distortion can have negative properties, but in its most technical sense, the word distortion simply means a twisted version, something that has been formed or molded from an original base substance. So I'm going to read some quotes, some segments from the Law of One, because I find this to be some of the most accurate, sort of metaphysically scientific material out there. And a lot of my cosmology is woven through the teachings, and it kind of binds all these separate aspects or teachings or levels or qualities that we're working on as spiritual students. And it sort of ties it together into a holistic cosmological understanding. So I often refer to this work, and it's part and parcel of my own expressions, my own understanding of creation. So the questioners during those channeling sessions with the loved one, with the entity named Ra, the questioners ask about basically the origin of existence, creation, what is first, what is second, what is third, and so on. So I'll read a few of these quotes now, and then I'll summarize it, and we'll go from there. Questioner: can you tell me of the earliest, first known thing in creation? I am Ra. The first known thing in the creation is infinity. The infinity is creation. Questioner: from this infinity, then, must have come what we experience as creation. What was the next step or the next evolvement? Answer: infinity became aware. This was the next step. Questioner: after this, what happened? Answer: awareness led to the focus of infinity into infinite energy. You have called this by various vibrational sound complexes, fancy term for word, because technically a word is a vibrational sound complex. That's why I like their precision. They don't want to leave anything up to interpretation. And that's how they see it. They don't see it as words. They see it as vibrational sound complexes. So you have called this infinite energy. So awareness led to the focus of infinity into infinite energy. You have called this by various vibrational sound complexes, the most common to your ears being logos or love. The Creator is the focusing of infinity as an aware or conscious principle, called by us, as closely as we can create understanding or learning in your language, intelligent infinity. So essentially, infinity plus this first emergence of awareness is intelligent infinity. And then from another segment, questioner: in yesterday's material you stated, we offer the law of one, the solving of paradoxes. You also mentioned earlier that the first paradox, or the first distortion, was the distortion of free will. Awareness and free will are more or less synonymous. So you mentioned earlier that the first distortion was free will. Could you tell me if there is a sequence? Is there a first, second, third, fourth distortion of the law of one, and so on? Answer: only up to a very short point. After this point, the manyness of distortions are equal one to another. And so there's three primary distortions. And after these three primary ingredients, which make up all of creation, there is no particular order or hierarchy to them. They can be considered equal in the grand scheme of things. The first distortion, free will, finds focus. This is the second distortion. In other words, this focus, which then produces that intelligent energy, is the second distortion, known to you as logos, the creative principle, or love. I typically refer to this as the God state, but more on that later. This intelligent energy thus creates a distortion known as light. So that's the third distortion. So we have awareness, more or less synonymous with free will, depending a little bit on the context in which the word is used. Then out of this awareness that's focusing this infinity into a sort of intelligent energy, which at this point is still formless. It's not anything we see yet. But this intelligent energy is also known as God or love, then creates a third distortion, a third primary distortion known as light. From these three distortions come many, many hierarchies of distortions, each having its own paradoxes to be synthesized, no one being more important than another. There's some more quotes I want to read to you, but a quick summary here. There is intelligent infinity, what I've also termed absolute reality, or sometimes simply referred to as the absolute, also known as the one, also sometimes referred to as source, or the Godhead, as opposed to God or the God state. This intelligent infinity, aka absolute reality that's aware, is all that truly exists, and it cannot be grokked or defined by any experience. It is forever beyond the realm of experiences. Now, within this intelligent infinity, or this aware absolute, appear three primary distortions, or activities. You could also view them as activities of this intelligent infinity. The first being free will or awareness, roughly describable as the ability to know and choose how to know, or choose a particular way of knowing. But in the absolute sense, it's simply the ability to know, which again is not separate from absolute reality. It's not separate from infinity. It's a function of it. It's an activity of it. It's one of its strengths, if you will. Intelligent energy, the second distortion, could also loosely be described as focus, or love, or God, or even plural gods. Perhaps more on that later. There's only one reality, but there can be multiple gods, and in a sense, you are a god. You are a creative principle. You are a free will with intelligent energy. And you are co-creating, you are co-shepherding creation. So the second distortion can be viewed as the active or creative principle or prime mover. So again, usually when we refer to God, sort of the active creator God, the one who's witnessing and governing and producing all the stars in the orbits and all that, that creative principle we typically refer to as God. And this, in this cosmology, is viewed as the second distortion after free will. And then the third distortion is that of light, which essentially is the substratum, or you could say primary material of and for the manifestation or the creation. Essentially everything is light, even physical matter is condensed light. Okay, a few more segments from the Law of One. Now I understand that the first distortion of intelligent infinity is the distortion of what we call free will. Can you give me a definition of this distortion? I am Ra. In this distortion of the Law of One, it is recognized that the Creator will know itself. And this is why we have a journey to begin with. This is why there is creation to begin with. So this inadvertently reveals the sole, or at least primary intention of all of existence, of all of creation as we know it, which is, it is recognized that the One will know itself, that the Creator will know itself. So if you ever wonder what's the meaning of all this, it simply can be boiled down to that, for the Creator to know itself. It just happens to look as your life in this particular way. I am Ra in this distortion. Okay, Law of One is recognized that the Creator will know itself. Questioner, then am I correct in assuming that the Creator will know itself, the Creator, then grants for this knowing the concept of freedom, total freedom of choice in the ways of knowing? Am I correct? I am Ra. This is quite correct. Questioner, this then being the first distortion of the Law of One, or simply put, of Source, of the One, all other distortions, which are the total experience of the creation, spring from this. Is this correct? So do all other distortions, do all experience that we know as creation, do they spring from this first distortion of the law of one, aka free will? I am Ra. This is both correct and incorrect. This is a bit of an advanced note. I'll comment on it in a second. In your illusion, meaning how you, humans, experience things, all experience indeed springs from the law of free will or the way of confusion. But in another sense, which we are learning, aka the source of this material, at their own level of perception, which is not physically incarnate, it's a higher density understanding or level of awareness. So in another sense, which we are learning, the experiences are this distortion. In other words, the experiences, aka creation, because creation can only be defined as experience. There's no evidence for anything other than experience. And so at a higher level, you may learn that these experiences do not spring from free will, they are free will. And this is where we're getting into the territory of inseparability, indivisibility, or simply put, oneness. Simple instruction to tune into this is, and I won't go into this too deeply right now, but you can take this home with you and practice it. But first you come to a recognition of that aware principle within you. So that which right now hears my voice without any effort on your part. That which right now knows that you're touching your nose, drinking from a glass, sitting in your chair, looking at a screen. There is an awareness about you which is not mental. It's not dependent on what you're focused upon so much. It's not dependent upon how you feel in this moment or what you're thinking. Is that background awareness, if you will, that space-like awareness that knows your room right now. That awareness, essentially, although for most people it's conflated and covered up to lesser or greater degrees, but essentially that awareness is your free will. Essentially, it is the Creator's free will. And so this awareness, yes, allows for the creation of all experiences. And so it seems that experiences spring forth from this free will awareness. But so again, in the higher levels, you can begin to recognize that experiences are this awareness. They directly, immediately, without any pause or gap, seamlessly, effortlessly, inseparably are your experiences. And your experiences are inseparable from this awareness. And a simple inquiry that can get you to a deeper experiential realization of this is the inquiry, have you ever experienced anything apart from awareness? Anything separate from awareness? Have you ever experienced anything outside of awareness? And you can go through your full database of memories, pleasant and unpleasant or neutral. You can go to any future experience you might have and imagine that. But at the end of the day, you'll have to conclude, ideally experientially, with a deep awareness and presence, that actually your entire world consists only of experiences. And these experiences have never occurred separate from, apart from, outside of awareness. So this is where we get into the territory of seventh density learning, aka the oneness of all things. So yes, it's correct that from our illusion, sort of as a human mind, space-time and all that, all experience springs from the law of free will. But in another sense, which they are learning, the experiences are free will. There is no separation. Okay, one more question. I would like for you to define love, the second distortion, in its sense as the second distortion. I am Ra. This must be defined against the background of intelligent infinity, or unity, or the one creator with the primal distortion of free will. AKA, this question, or the answer to this question about what is love as a second distortion, must be defined against the background of intelligent infinity, or absolute reality plus awareness. The term love then may be seen as the focus, the choice of attack, the type of energy of an extremely, shall we say, high order, which causes intelligent energy to be formed from the potential of intelligent infinity in just such and such a way. This then may be seen to be an object rather than an activity by some of your peoples. And the principle of this extremely strong energy focus being worshipped as the creator instead of unity or oneness from which all love emanate. Again, a very advanced, subtle nuance here that's being pointed out almost inadvertently or in between the answers. That's again why this material is so rich, because the more you advance in your own understanding experientially, your own awakening, you can read this material and in the same line that seems to answer one thing, there's a host of other implications that you can realize and connect the dots with and so on. Anyway, this is not for everyone, but this was a key component in my own understanding and awakening, this material. So anyway, what Ra is saying here, and I've observed this many times myself in religions and spiritual practices and communities and teachings and teachers, which is that, and in myself at an earlier stage, that we sort of erroneously, now it's not a bad thing, but it is an error ultimately, it's a mistaken conflation ultimately, that we will worship, that we will meditate upon, that we will be devoted to God as if it is this intelligent energy field of love. Or you could say this strong sense of presence energy, which because of its sort of intensity and its presence is viewed as an object or a sort of a final thing to then worship or meditate upon or believe in as if it's source. But actually it's just an emanation of source. It's not yet the real source. And so often 7th and 8th density teachings, aka what I call the God state 7th density and the absolute reality 8th density, are combined, they're sort of lumped together in most traditions. There's only very few lineages that actually make a clear experiential distinction between absolute reality and the emanation of source, which in the East is often referred to as consciousness, love, bliss, or awareness, love, light, or Satchitananda, existence, consciousness, bliss. But that energy field, that presence, which almost feels like sort of an absolute object, like the object that constitutes or that underpins or that underlies, that's the substratum of all experiences. And in this way, it's a great thing to, quote unquote, worship or practice towards. To practice the recognition thereof is a very high spiritual practice. However, it is a misallocation of source still. It's still conflation of source with one of its emanations. It's not yet grokked then that there is the one infinite reality beyond that or prior to that. Okay, these are just some quotes relevant to this topic, but I'll try to speak a little bit more about free will in its absolute sense, and then I shall proceed with free will in its relative sense or its functioning. Just take a few deep breaths and relax your mind. I'd love for you to get an intuitive sense of this free will in its original or absolute nature. I more or less equate awareness with free will, because inherent in awareness is an ability to choose, Because if you have the ability to know, inherently within that is an ability to choose, to direct, or you could say to focus, which is especially what it does. Then it chooses to focus itself into an intelligent energy principle, a creative principle, aka love, or God in active form, the creator in energetic form, the first manifestation of what we typically refer to as a God or the God. Source in action, in other words, source in creative action, which is exactly what awareness or free will does. It focuses this infinity, this aware infinity, into this formless, intelligent energy of sorts. And energy is not the perfect word for it, but it will do. So now we have an aware infinity that has with it a creative capacity, the capacity, the potential, the ability to create, to produce, to emanate, which then begins to vibrate in the form of what we know as light, which then makes experiences visible, if you will. It now allows for what we perceive as creation, which is just an emanation of infinity. It's not ultimately real, that's why we call it an illusion. But at the heart of all this, absolutely speaking, see if you can tune into this infinity which became aware. Imagine, which is impossible, but imagine nevertheless, infinity. And the reason it's impossible to imagine infinity is because infinity is not a thing, and it's not an experience, or else it wouldn't be infinite. And all that we usually have to draw upon, the only resources we have to our imaginative availability is experiences, things we've experienced before. And so when you try to imagine infinity, you'll imagine usually an infinite space, something akin to the cosmos, your image of the cosmos, which is fine. And then maybe you remove all the stars and all the galaxies and all the dust and all the asteroids and all the suns. And then you're sort of left with this sense of infinite space, but that's not infinity. That's just a perception of space, which is an experience.
Massaro University is a vibrant online community dedicated to accelerating your awakening and activating your purpose for the benefit of all. Join live sessions with Bentinho and workshops led by experienced facilitators. Deepen your wisdom, empowerment, and self-knowledge, and experience life-changing shifts week after week. At Massaro University, finding like-hearted seekers is easy and inevitable. Lifelong friendships and a shared purpose fuel profound personal and collective growth. Create your free account today at massaro.university and step into a community that's designed to elevate every aspect of your life.
You cannot understand infinity by means of consciousness, experiences, or imagination. Precisely because infinity will never, ever, ever become an experience. And what do you have to go on right now, aside from experience? Can you conjure up anything that's not an experience? Even if you were to go to nothingness, or perhaps the initial blankness of the causal body, or even if you imagine as clearly as you can this infinite empty space without any things in it, that is still an experience within free will. And so quite literally, in your imagination then, you are creating an experience of infinity, although it will never actually be infinity. But you see, even in this process of trying to imagine infinity, you are actually using infinity's awareness, its aware principle, inherent within which lies the ability to choose, to know, to produce, to create, in other words, an experience, which is all creation is. It's a bunch of experiences. So actively right now, as you're doing this exercise, and also when you're not doing this exercise, at every moment of your life, you are literally free will creating an experience. In other words, you are awareness choosing a focus which produces, which shapes the vibrations of love and light into an experience, which then also can include space and time. There's also experiences without space and time. But because we also imagine space and time, we tend to now believe that what we have just created in our imagination has a real existence out there in space. And we start to localize ourselves as if we are over here inside of the skin somewhere, even though our consciousness has never been found inside the skin, nor inside the brain. Moment to moment, we are deploying our inherent capacity of awareness to choose, to focus, to know, and we are actively knowing the Creator in distorted form. We're producing a distortion, a perception, an experience that is an experience of infinity. But it is not infinity itself experientially. It is that ultimately because it's an illusion, whatever you're experiencing. But none of what you can experience can give you a proper image, can be a proper definition of infinity or source itself. The only way source can be realized experientially is by transcending consciousness itself and having awareness, in a sense, reflect back to infinity its own nature directly, without the use of experiences. Now, this is sort of the highest level of realization, so it's okay, you don't have to get this or understand what I'm saying exactly. But what you can realize right now, what you can feel into, is that you are aware, and that this awareness has the inherent ability to know, hence the word awareness, which is just another word really for being aware of or knowing. And that inherent in this is the free will, the freedom to choose, the freedom to focus, the freedom to choose what you shall know. In other words, what you shall produce or create. And all of this is done ultimately as a gift by the Creator for itself to know itself in infinite numbers of ways. And this free will, this absolute free will, is stepped down all the way into the relative free will of you as a seemingly individuated spark of awareness, aka soul consciousness, if you will, or the individuated sense of I am conscious, I know, I can choose, and so on. These are all stepped down versions of this absolute free will, which is infinity being aware. And then from that, everything is produced, everything flows. This is you right now as we speak. All the other stuff is bullshit. Your entire personality is a bunch of convoluted assumptions about your own free creation, about what you are imagining all the time. So free will is imagining something, and it's imagining more of the same, and then it's imagining more of the same with slight alterations, and then it's imagining more of the same, very similar, slight alterations, and then we call this time. And then it creates the illusion of space and time and location and being the physical body in a physical world, in a real universe made of matter, It appears that way, but that's interpretation. It's never been proven. Because all means to prove that matter is real will be another experience within awareness, confirming only that all we ever know is awareness, choosing a focus or an experience. So we create from this freedom without any realness to it, without any real substance or matter. Out of infinity, this awareness produces the illusion of love and light, which then subsequently is utilized to form all the different vibrations. But it's essentially a process of awareness imagining. And then what do? We begin to interpret through words and concepts and language and symbol understanding. We start to weave our perceptions together into storylines and assumptions that now appear to form some sense of self. But if you look clearly, you don't even have to clear all that stuff out, as if it's real stuff that you have to really clear out. If you see clearly enough right now into the true nature of your freedom, into the true nature of your free awareness, and if you can conceive how your present experience of me speaking to you through this screen is actually you as awareness imagining a perception, then that cleanses you right away. It clears your perspective, your understanding of yourself. Then you see limitation and victimization and complexity and personal identity and all that are choices within your freedom to choose. They are not realities that you're dependent upon, that define you. You're defining them, and you don't have to believe in them as real. So right now, all that you are is infinity that is aware, and this awareness can choose its focus, can produce imagination, aka experience. That's all that's going on right now as we speak. The more fully you realize this experientially, the closer you will liberate yourself back to this original unity, this liberation, this perfection, which binds all these illusory things. You are God. Don't interpret this from the personal lens. It's just a metaphysical fact of existence. If you exist, that means you are God extending itself in the way that you are right now. There is no you and God. There is only the assumptions of you and God. But the assumptions of yourself are not yourself. So in truth, there's not you and God, there's just God experiencing experiences, creating experiences, choosing with its awareness experiences, perceptions, illusions. And then the interpretations of what you're imagining produce this illusory sense of solidity, of linearity, of consistency, of personality, of patterns, of preferences, and so on and so forth. But right now, as I'm speaking to you, all there really is infinity, aware, and choosing its focus of how to know itself. That's you. If you can peek through the illusion and go straight for the unity of it all, you will attain the greatest freedom in the shortest amount of time possible. You will self-liberate. You will self-transcend. You will self-realize. My friends, you do not need another 20 years. Now, there's going to be degrees of intensity of this, so the journey doesn't necessarily end there. But you can start with unity instead of start with the human being all the time. Make sure you take your moments of reaching really high, remembering how free you truly are and that your self-liberation is up to you, and it's not up to your interpretations of reality. It's not up to the personal self and its little quirks and distortions. These will always exist. That's a long journey. That will happen anyway. Make sure you frequently reach for the absolute highest and believe in your innate capacity and right to realize that, because you are already that. And since you are already that, you have every right in this fake universe to see it clearly. It's up to your free will, how you wish to know yourself. There are no laws or rules or limitations placed upon this right. It is up to your belief in yourself, your free will, your determination. Being so overly amused with all these distortions of the mind-body-spirit complex is not in any case necessary. It is chosen by each of you as an alternative to knowing instead that great unity which binds all of these illusory things. You don't have to go to the movies. You choose to. Similarly, you do not have to be distracted by your mind-body-spirit complex distortions, personalizations, interpretations of its own imagination, limiting its own freedom by means of assumptions, victimizing itself to its own power. But you choose to. This is not in any case necessary. You can realize right now. Always remember this. Try to activate that, okay? You deserve it. It's your right because you are it. Nothing can stop you. There is no spiritual law or rule that says you cannot go straight to source. That you first have to go through this and this and this and this and this. Just because that's the path most well known, most often traversed, doesn't mean it's a law or a rule. You are not imprisoned in linearity. You're not imprisoned in space and time. You're not imprisoned in a personal psychological journey. Ultimately, it's up to you to choose to recognize the infinite freedom inherent in your own awareness, your own free will. You're always already free, and God in action. And you are even the absolute, infinity not in action. Whether you recognize this or not, whether you aspire to this, whether you believe in this, and claim your right to know it directly is up to you. That's the choosing of awareness. All right, this all being said, we will step it down to a more relative, relational, human, understandable, practical, day-to-day relational reality. I already said that. Chapter 2, Relative Free Will. Its functioning, in other words. I've divided this chapter or topic into two subtopics or subchapters. Subchapter 1 is respecting the free will of others. What does that mean? How to do that? And the other subtopic, the second subtopic, is increasing free will or amassing free will or accumulating free will. This is about how to regain your free will, how to activate your free will, how to raise in your quote-unquote spiritual power. But first, respecting the free will of other selves. Other selves is a fancy term and a more accurate term for others. But they are other selves because there's only one self ultimately. The golden rule, as Jesus proclaimed it, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. You're probably familiar with this golden rule. This is perhaps the simplest way to remember how to honor free will on a day-to-day basis between peers of roughly equal spiritual advancement, or for actions and decisions pertaining mostly to practical, physical matters only. I'll repeat that. So the golden rule, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. This is perhaps the simplest way to remember how to honor free will on a day-to-day basis between peers or other selves of roughly equal spiritual advancement, or for actions and decisions pertaining mostly to practical, physical matters only. However, for the spiritual adept who begins to inevitably teach/learn, because every act of teaching is an act of learning, and every act of learning is an act of teaching. So whenever we place teach in front of learn, it means we're talking about the activity of teaching from the perspective of the teacher, and the other side of the coin that then results is there is learning automatically. If learning or learn is placed in front of teaching, so for instance, learn teaching, this then looks at that same situation from the point of view of the student or the one who is receiving the teaching, the one who is doing the learning, but in learning, they are automatically also teaching. Since this is an indivisible term, they use it in this way in the Law of One, and I often adopt that in my writings and so on. So again, when I say teach, learn, or teach learning, you can simply, if you want to simplify it, you can replace that with the word teaching. Teach learning essentially is what we've called teaching. And learn teaching is simply what we call learning. So whichever word comes first is where the emphasis is on. That's the activity that's being described. It's just not complete without the learning element or the teaching element in learning also being highlighted. So, do unto others as you would have them do unto you is a good golden rule. It's a good rule of thumb that you can use to most situations, how to deal with your neighbor, how to respect their property, things like that. Not hurt somebody if you don't absolutely have to for some really good reason to protect someone or something. You know, those kinds of basic ethical rules. It's a very simple golden rule to remember, and it almost always accurately applies. Would I want them to do this unto me right now? If not, then let me not do it unto them. So that's an easy, simple, layman's way to know if your behavior is proper and appropriate and in alignment with the Law of One. However, it's a little bit limiting. So, however, for the spiritual adept who begins to inevitably teach, learn, and impress his own vibration upon those around him who may be of lesser spiritual maturity, honoring the law of free will, aka the law of confusion, gets more complex and nuanced. As such, the spiritual adept is in need of an increasingly more complete, yet less easily definable understanding of how best to honor the free will of other selves. Ultimately, what infringes upon the spiritual free will of other selves and what does not is a matter of moment-to-moment, case-by-case, intuitive measuring, rather than the blatant application of a generalized rule or definition. However, to start the adept off with a reasonable, general set of instructions to guide him on his way while he develops his intuition to the subtler, finer levels of precise perception and discernment, I will provide here a few rules of thumb. Rule of thumb number 1, humility all the way through. Remember that everything begins and ends in mystery, both for yourself and any other self. As such, always know that you don't know everything, including what is actually best for the other self. This rule of caution becomes less relevant or necessary the more illuminated not meaning smart, learned, or clever, but actually enlightened, you become. Since you'll become able to gauge with ever higher degrees of accuracy and true impersonal discernment what it is the other self needs, is asking for as a whole being, conscious, subconsciously, and unconsciously, and as such what is relevant for such a seeker to truly hear, know, or learn. Regardless of whether they say they do or whether they say they do not want to know about something. Their conscious mind is but a small portion of their seeking self. Nevertheless, humility should be a trait you embody all the way through to the end of your own journey of self-illumination. This will prevent you from making significant incursions into the free will journey of other selves. Always let their journey be their own as much as possible. Rule of thumb number 2. Only if they ask shall they receive. If what you feel you can offer, especially in terms of spiritual illumination, is not requested, it is generally best to refrain from learning that other self directly in that moment. If they ask you directly, you are generally free to speak your mind/heart as long as it is done from a space of impersonal love for their beingness. Rule of thumb number 3. Give them what they are ready for. Even if what you can offer has been seemingly requested by the other self's conscious mind, this does not automatically imply they are ready to hear everything you have to offer them in terms of wisdom, knowledge, or reflections on their person. Do your best to discern what the person or group in question is actually most benefited by, and deliver that with love and without any expectation as to how they should receive this or how well they should learn, teach, or apply what you are offering. In short, share what is appropriate to their level of understanding, and do so without expectation or attachment to outcome. Rule of thumb number 4. Know when to back off. This is a continuation of rule of thumb number 3, which was give them what they are ready for. Not just what they're asking for, but then also, are they ready for what I'm actually providing them with? So rule number thumb then, know when to back off. If you notice you're getting into tricky psychological or spiritual territory, and you are causing more confusion or disruption of their current worldview and self-awareness than is desirable, lower the intensity of your learning and or back off altogether in as compassionate, unattached a way as you possibly can. So if you notice you're beginning to infringe upon their free will, you're beginning to press buttons that they don't actually want pressed, even though maybe they initially asked for it, just back off a little bit. Lower the intensity, see if you can match them at that more scared human level for a second. And if it still doesn't work, then back off altogether with integrity and communication where that's possible. Rule of thumb number 5, it's the last one. Don't take away all confusion or mystery, so they maintain the need to choose freely for themselves. In everything you share, make sure that it still allows them to come to their own conclusions, beliefs, and degree of faith in what you are saying or demonstrating. If what you have to share or demonstrate would disrupt the other self's fundamental understanding of their own existence or the world too much, and if it has not been requested with a strong, full-bodied sense of devotion, surrender, and willingness to transcend their current worldview, consider if what you are about to share or demonstrate takes away from their most important learning while in third density incarnate state, which is that of learning to choose freely of their own accord, their own way of believing what they will, through their engagement with the mystery of life. All right, final segment of this topic. Chapter 2.2, Increasing or Amassing Free Will. Your essential free will equals that absolute free will of the Creator itself. This is your source and your ultimate destiny. The more you advance on the spiritual journey of self-awareness and self-actualization, the more spiritual power, aka free will, you shall accrue or amass. The accumulation of free will is effectuated by virtually any genuine spiritual exercise that focuses the adept's primary faculties of consciousness, will, and faith on realizations and actualizations which are of an ever higher vibrational nature. I'll repeat that. It's a bit of a long sentence. The accumulation of free will is effectuated by virtually any genuine spiritual exercise that focuses the adept's primary faculties of consciousness, will, and faith on realizations and actualizations which are of an ever higher vibrational nature. There are roughly two primary stages or phases pertaining to the amassing of free will. Before we begin to truly amass free will or spiritual power on our upward spiraling journey into the light of the One, we typically first, at least as a human incarnate self, need to go through a somewhat lengthy phase of thawing out our current frozen free will. Since the veil of third density has separated our minds into the conscious and unconscious, and since our conditioning is often less than spiritually ideal, such as our upbringing and our education, we are generally at the start of our active spiritual journey dealing with a rather segregated or compartmentalized mind complex. We have stuffed aspects of ourselves into mental drawers to keep us feeling sane, safe, and comfortable. We have artificially distinguished between what is and what is not acceptable to experience within ourselves. And as a result, we have divided the wholeness of our beingness into compartments with artificial labels on them. This degree of self-judgment and self-compartmentalization has led to a state of non-cohesion and dishonesty within the self. This is greatly disempowering. A proper analogy for this is that we took the entire body of water, which is our full self or our complete free will, and we froze it by means of labeling and giving different areas of our body of water value judgments. Once this water of wholeness, our free will, has been frozen, we now cut up this block of ice into compartments and stuff many of these aspects of self in a psychological or metaphysical freezer of sorts, only allowing a small portion of our free will to flow in melted liquid form. This first phase, thus, of freeing up our free will consists largely of what we typically refer to as a process of integration, where we look at these condemned and hidden aspects of self and understand, accept, forgive, and thus re-embrace or reintegrate them into the wholeness of ourself. That portion of our free will which was heretofore not liquid, therefore not flowing freely and thus not usable, makes us confused about our own manifestations and feel like a victim of our own creations. Every time we take such a frozen chunk of our own free will out of our freezer's drawers and look at it with loving awareness, the ice begins to melt and the free will becomes free again, integrated and now usable. This is empowering. Once this process has been sufficiently established, our journey to amassing greater free will now becomes a truly spiritual rather than a psychological one. We begin to look up at the stars of our spiritual potential and activate higher realizations and integrate the free will which such realizations release into our wholeness of self. This, in a nutshell, is the spiritual journey, all the way up to the level of our absolute free will at the level of the Creator.
Thank you for watching this Bentinho live session. Bentinho now hosts these transformative live sessions completely free, offering profound insights and guidance to support your journey. To attend the next live session with Bentinho, simply visit massaro.university and follow the instructions to create your free account.